Morning, everyone. Happy 5 more sleeps until Christmas is ruined day. And welcome to the news agenda with me, Fleet Street Fox. And today I'm joined by the Mirror's editor, Alison Phillips. Morning, Alison.
Morning, Susie. Morning, everybody.
Everyone be on best behaviour. She is in charge. Now, this is the People's Paper Review. So get into the comments, ask us your questions. We'll do our best to answer them for you. And of course, really good questions get the news agenda mug. Everybody wants one of those. So what have we got today? Well, the Mirror has splashed on fears of new restrictions coming in, with the big question being whether it happens before or after Christmas. Not if there are restrictions, before or after is all that's in abeyance, really, it seems. The Prime Minister is meeting with his cabinet today to discuss it, and the Chief Scientific Officer, Sir Patrick Vallance, will be briefing them at 12 noon, with leaks appearing inevitably about 12:15 probably. But it's not as simple as all that, is it, Alison? Because he doesn't want to impose any new safety measures at all. Most people are already taking their own. And even if he tried, he's got to recall Parliament, hold a vote, address the nation, get it all signed into law. And doing that before Christmas is very squeaky, perhaps Wednesday if you're lucky. But that's just 3 days before Christmas. So, Alison, considering that it would cause massive anger, and a lot of people would probably just ignore it anyway, what are the chances, do we think, of that actually happening this week?
I think the chances of any new major curbs this week probably now are looking fairly slim. I mean, as you say, there's so much pressure now against any further restrictions. I mean, there's now talk there's as many as 10 cabinet ministers, so that's those that are closest to Boris, resisting any new restrictions. So he's got that push going against him. He's also got the more of the general public who have moved away from the idea of restrictions, particularly post all the stories about the parties, because now there's this sense, well, if the government don't stick to the rules, I'm not going to stick to the rules. So he's in a very difficult position there. However, at the same time, he's got the people that we can really respect, and the people who really are the scientists, who really are the experts in this, people like Sir Patrick Vallance, saying that more restrictions are needed now. Otherwise, we're going to see a backlog of cases and a backlog of hospitalisations taken since January, where we could be in a really, really difficult position. And another thing I think that's not really been quite factored into all of this is the impact on public services. So if we get to Christmas Eve or Christmas Day and you've got hardly any staff over in hospitals, you've got hardly any police out there, you've got hardly anybody driving ambulances, we could then be getting into some very difficult situations. And that bit, I'm not sure has been completely factored in.
No, so there's lots of talk about deaths and hospitalisations and whether the NHS can cope with that, but not so much about whether the NHS can keep running if its staff are all at home with Omicron.
And there was the stories around at the weekend that certainly in London, you've got some boroughs of London where they've got sort of vast swathes of their workforce either off with the virus themselves, which of course then you're looking at 10 days, it's not just a day or so, it's 10 days. And then you've got other people who've been in close contact with those people who are also having to isolate or test. So I think we're entering a really, I mean, many people are saying this is potentially the worst bit of the pandemic so far. But what's kind of hard for people is that we're not seeing the massive numbers of hospitalizations. We're not seeing the massive numbers of deaths that we were seeing last January. And so people are saying, well, hang on a minute, this doesn't feel that bad. It seems quite mild. It's just like a heavy cold for a lot of people. And that does seem the case on the face of it for many people. But we know that with the vast numbers of people that are getting it, even if only a small percentage are going to be hospitalised, and then even a small percentage of that are going to die, you're still looking at some pretty big numbers, plus the impact on the rest of society.
Yeah. Now, Robbie says, do you think there should be more restrictions before Christmas? It's not up to us, luckily, Robbie, because we're only journalists. But the people who do know about this stuff, the epidemiologists, the scientists, and the people who run the NHS were asking for Plan B on October the 13th, right?
I mean,
Didn't get published. Yeah, October the 22nd. And then Boris Johnson didn't bring it in till very late.
But you sort of think, again, we're in a situation where 4 days before Christmas now, people have ordered their turkeys, they've told their mums that they're going around for their dinner, and so there's all this kind of investment, and we all know that there's that investment in the emotion of Christmas in that sense. And the idea that it's now being left this very late hour to give any kind of clear guidance on what's a safe or not a safe thing to do. And we've now got a leader who, even if he wanted to make a decision, which I don't think decision making is one of these things that particularly enjoys, because he wants to just sort of please everybody and ends up pleasing nobody. But even if he wanted to make a decision, he couldn't, because he's now got the backbenchers of his party are so opposed to any new measures that we've got sort of the really quite right wing of the Conservative Party, the real libertarians, who are actually now going to be controlling the public health of this country, which to me seems an incredibly dangerous place to be.
I think that lot in controlling anything is a very bad idea, generally speaking. But didn't he miss a COBRA meeting only yesterday? There was one between sort of the home nations, wasn't there, with all the devolved powers talking about COVID, and he didn't even bother turning up. I mean, I know it's a Sunday, but it is his job.
I know, so he wasn't there, and Sajid Javid wasn't there, Hal Secretary wasn't there either, and Nicola Sturgeon, I think, was furious about it, and rightly so, because again, one of the problems we're seeing is that the different nations, so you've got Wales, have got one set of rules now, you've got Scotland, have got a different set of rules, and not only is that really difficult for lots of people who are travelling for Christmas, which lots of people do, lots of people will be going home to Scotland or Wales or vice versa, also it's the confusion, because sort of think, well, if that's the rule there, but it's not the rule here, what does that mean? From the very beginning, everyone thought it would be so much better common sense to have one consistent rule across the 4 home nations, but they haven't managed to do that, because unfortunately what we're seeing again and again and again is politics getting in the way and dividing, where really, but when we've been successful during this pandemic is when there has been a united effort, cross-party, cross-nations, cross disciplines between the politics and the scientists. And now I get the real sense, as we go into Christmas, the whole thing is fractured and everyone's just doing their own thing. And this is where it will all fall apart.
Well, the union is fractured, isn't it, to some extent, not just by Brexit, but by this, because, like you say, there should have been a countrywide, nationwide, this is the rule at any point. And because Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland all felt that the Prime Minister was going too slowly, they had to go and do their own thing using devolved powers, and then we end up looking worse. Now, Andrew says, do you think the NHS can meet the deadline set by the Prime Minister, given the time of year when people are away on holiday? I'm assuming you mean the vaccination deadline. He's set us the deadline for about 1 million booster jabs per day. And I think we're at about 800,000 now, aren't we, Alison? Which is unprecedented.
Yeah. Well, I think yesterday it virtually hit the million number, which is incredible. I mean, so it is an amazing effort. The vaccination drive, the volunteers and the staff that have been out, the NHS staff that have been out there, it is a wonder to watch. And when I got myself boosted a little while ago, it's still quite emotional even now to sort of, you just think this is this great national effort of fighting back. And we all know that if you are boosted, then your chances of dodging Omicron is so much greater. It's going to keep you safe personally, it's also going to, if you're doing your bit for society to ensure that our hospitals aren't crumbling under pressure, it means that people who've got cancer are going to get their treatments quicker, they're not going to be backlogged. So it's really playing your part in that national effort. And whether we're going to hit it by the end of the year, it was a massive ask. It was a huge ask for the NHS, coming fairly shortly after people like GPs have been sort of told off by the government for not doing enough face-to-face appointments. A short while after, the pay increase that perhaps that they hoped to get was sort of knocked out. And also, we know that the level of exhaustion within the NHS. So to then sort of come out and say, right, this is what I want by the end of the year was a very big ask. But yet again, we are seeing those people rise to the challenge. I'm not convinced we'll make it, but hopefully we'll make it fairly soon after.
I'm not convinced that making it, even if we do, will be enough, to be honest.
No,
it's so slow at the start.
We've run out of time. We're only like 10 days till the end of the year now. So,
regular viewers of this show, Alison, know that I spent about a month, 6 weeks trying to get my booster jab when the government said I could, and I couldn't. Now, Michael said, keep asking your questions, everybody. What do you think about January restrictions? What do you think about having them before Christmas? Are you happy for that? Are you going to go ahead and have your Christmas anyway? Get in the comments, let us know. Michael says, do you think there's going to be a full January lockdown? Michael, if there's ever any kind of a lockdown again, it's never going to be like it was the first time when everyone stayed home apart from Dominic Cummings, right? That's probably never going to happen because Dominic Cummings isn't in government anymore. So he'd stay home too as well this time. But you're never going to have all shops shut and everyone in their houses and going for 16 walks a day kind of thing. It's not going to happen, I don't think. But you will have, perhaps, there'll be bans on things that cause more socialization. So you'll have perhaps pubs being closed or curfews, things like that to limit the amount of time people are out socializing. There'll be a lot of work still going on because so many businesses, Alison, did find a way to adapt, didn't they? In those first couple of lockdowns, they found ways around lots of it. So I don't think it'll be that bad again. What do you reckon?
No, I don't think it'll be that bad again. But I do think that, there's a lot of talk now about some kind of circuit breaker that will be announced in the days just immediately after Christmas. So, like you say, that might mean sort of back down to 2 households or a small number of people or only be able to meet outside. It's heartbreaking for all those businesses that got through that first pandemic, through the first wave, who were nearly went out of business, really rallied themselves, were hoping for a good Christmas. Now that's in tatters. There still doesn't yet seem to be any great sort of financial support from the Chancellor. He's been waltzing around here, there and everywhere, but not actually really being there to support businesses. So it's an incredibly worrying time for them. And I think the other thing that we have to factor in is what's going to happen to the schools. Hopefully, we've been told before that children will be safeguarded again and that they wouldn't close schools again. But I think, we'll perhaps believe it when we see it.
Yeah, and they're not vaccinating children, as millions of children worldwide have been vaccinated quite safely. They're still not doing it in this country below the age of 12. Now, Bobby said, I'm treble jabbed and I've tested positive. Bad luck, Bobby. Feeling like I've got a cold, but now in my own lockdown. Merry Christmas. She's going to be isolating like so many others on Christmas Day. And for any anti-vaxxers out there, yes, you can be treble jabbed and tested positive. But Bobby's got a cold because she was triple jabbed. Right? Yeah. If she wasn't triple jabbed, she would be flat on her back and possibly needing ambulance help or oxygen monitoring or other problems and causing issues for the NHS. So thank you, Bobby, for getting jabbed, and I hope you get over it soon. Jackie says, do you think schools will open in January? Big question, isn't it? And if they do, if there's any teachers to actually run them. They're talking in the 4-5 spread there. There's reports that retired teachers will be asked to go back to schools to help run them in the new year because they're thinking, like you were saying, the public services aren't going to be there. There won't be any staff.
Yeah, I think that's a real concern. I know my daughter was told to clear her locker on the last day of term by the teachers, who obviously had some concerns. Not necessarily working on any evidence, just the concern that they might leave their books at home in the new year. So I just think that the children have really suffered during all of this, and we just need to keep them in school. And that's why we just need to get people vaccinated.
Yes, it would be great, wouldn't it? Now, there's more data all the time, but because of, as you were saying, Alison, because of Omicron's sort of exponential rise, the early data is really small numbers. But the imminent threat that might be coming is really massive numbers that way. Yes, that way. So on where it says here on the screen, people tested positive. That little red banner on the right, that's the exponential rise. Deaths have dropped. Patients are being admitted to hospital, but it's slow. But these are the people being admitted to hospital because of an infection 3 weeks ago or 2 weeks ago. The exponential rise we've got there about the positive cases is what's happening in the new year. The hospitalizations will be coming out of that chunk of people.
And the patients admitted. Sorry, Susie. I was going to say the patients admitted is an interesting graph there, because that is now going into fairly sharp climb there. I mean, and the deaths really is sort of almost not what we're discussing at this point, because you're looking from the point that somebody contracts the virus to the point where they might sadly die. You could be looking at 4-5 weeks possibly, so sometimes even longer. So that number isn't really relevant to Omicron at all yet. So it's where we're going to get to the other side of Christmas, and yes, lots of people are saying yes, but they've said in the past it's going to be much worse than it was, and this has happened. And I think one of the things you have to factor in there is when we've had these warnings in the past, action has then happened, which has reduced, because those are like worst case scenarios if we do nothing to stem this problem. So again, the numbers that we're looking at, this is and the potential deaths and the potential hospitalizations. That's if we do nothing, and hopefully we will do something, and we won't get those numbers.
And those figures might change, because it does look like people are making their own decisions now, not waiting for government restrictions, because everyone's just got fed up of waiting for Boris. Donald says they're losing respect for him. And there is some sort of more terrifying stuff on the right-hand side of that 4-5 spread, talking about perhaps COVID patients being treated in their own homes, perhaps with live-in carers or remote monitoring of oxygen levels, because they just can't necessarily be treated in hospital. But statistician Sir David Spiegelhalter says no matter what we do now, what happens between now and the end of the year is baked in. It's already happened. It's just in the post. And it's what happens in January that we're trying to change now. But like you say, I mean, he hasn't changed. This is the thing that's amazing to me. In 2 years, 3 lockdowns, 3 waves, is it now, or the 4th? Boris Johnson just hasn't learned. He's going late again, isn't he?
Yes, I mean, I think he's perhaps one of those life's eternal optimists, where he thinks that things will be okay, or maybe this time it'll be all right. And sometimes that optimism has taken him a long way politically. I mean, that's sort of what got him into power. That's what got him by Kate saying, let's get Brexit done. And that's kind of what got Brexit done, because he did have that optimism, he kept pushing forward. But sometimes in life you come across things that just sheer you wanting it to be isn't enough, and this appears to be one. And as a result, he's got to a situation where he kind of keeps hoping that things are going to be okay, and so refuses to make a decision. Doesn't want to upset the Writers' Party. Doesn't want to, doesn't want to upset the scientists either. And so he's kind of like trying to wobble down the middle. But as a result, ends up pleasing absolutely nobody.
Yeah, well, he's got this fetish for saving Christmas. But the way he does it is always just to make Christmas infinitely worse. As Liz said there, should have done a circuit breaker a month ago when Sage wanted something like that and had a fighting chance then that Christmas would have been saved. That's the way they've got it all through. I keep asking your question.
Of course, is the whole point of being a leader. The whole point of leading is you lead on the decision. You take the decision before people like you and I, Susie, are sitting here saying, well, we should have done this, we should have done that. And I completely accept there is a massive economic risk to everything he is doing, and he needs to look at the science, look at the economic impact, and make a decision and lead with that decision and sell that decision to the public, to his own backbenchers. But unfortunately now he's such a kind of a wounded political creature that he can't make a decision, but even if he can, he's unable to sell that decision to anybody.
No, exactly. And just a reminder that if Sage suggested Plan B on October the 13th, October the 13th, he waited 57 days, 8 weeks and 1 day to actually impose Plan B. And that was just wearing masks in shops. And he waited 8 weeks to do that. So, who knows where we are now with restrictions and lockdowns. But there is some other stuff. Now, the latest photos have emerged of one of the Downing Street parties. I think we're on 14 at the moment, which is more than anybody else has ever had a party in the last couple of years.
More parties than I've had in my life. But anyway, yeah.
This time, it was in the Downing Street garden during lockdown in May last year. Now, a spokesman for the Prime Minister said it's a work meeting. But in this photograph, which we can't reproduce here for legal reasons, there are no pens, no paper, no flip charts, no Zoom screens. There's just cheese, there's wine, there's a number of screw top empties. I mean, Alison, we've all worked in newsrooms for a long time, but I've never been at a work meeting that was quite like that. And there's also Johnson's wife and baby as people all lounging about in roughly the same way they do in a pub garden. And that's all fed into... there's them. Yes. Oh, great. Oh, lock in. That's all fed into a new survey showing that 51% of Tory voters don't trust the Prime Minister and 66% think he's a liar. Alison, does this tell us that the remaining 1/3 of Tory voters just haven't been paying any damn attention whatsoever?
Well, I think it's really hard. If you voted Conservative at the last election, obviously you want your leader to be successful. You want it all to go really well. I mean, that's a completely human emotion. It's like if you support a football team, you want your team to win. You don't want to admit that they're a bit rubbish and they need to sign a new striker. And I don't think you can kind of criticise those people because they want things to get better. But as we've just been discussing with Boris, sometimes wanting something to happen isn't quite enough, and sometimes you have to take a long, hard look at the situation and think, right, what really is for the best, and what really needs to happen here. And certainly, that's what a lot of Tory MPs are doing at the moment. They're looking at Boris Johnson and saying, well, however much we might have wished for him to be a great leader, we're now reaching that point where perhaps the evidence would indicate that he's not, and that maybe they ought to be looking elsewhere. And I think what's really interesting about the latest party picture, and also all the party pictures, is it would indicate that this is symptomatic of a wider culture. So remember, this picture was taken shortly after Dominic Cummings had been up to Barnard Castle, but before that story had actually been revealed in the press, hadn't come out at that point. So at this point, I just think that cultures in any organisations are created by the person at the top. And I think all the evidence would indicate that Boris Johnson created a culture which really normal rules did not apply. They just did not apply. You do what you want when you want. And unfortunately for him, if you have that culture, at some point you're going to get found out. And that is what has been happening over the last weeks in quite extraordinary degree.
Yeah, getting found out and found out and found out and found out and found out again.
And that's just the stuff you found out. What about the other stuff we haven't yet found out?
Blimey. I mean, Andrew says Johnson stumbles from one controversy to another. He's a joke. He's not a joke, Andrew, because jokes make you laugh. And I think we're at the stage that that's not actually happening anymore. Now, keep asking us your questions. What do you think about Christmas? Are you going to be going ahead with it anyway? Are you going to be following any new restrictions? Are you going to be imposing your own sort of self-restrictions and perhaps not seeing family or to protect them? Get into the comments. Let us know, and we'll have a little wrap up at the end. But first of all, there is some good news in the world. There is something that's going right, and here it is. Now, despite all the talk about the NHS being overwhelmed, it is worth pointing out that it has millions of staff, frontline and back of house, who are still doing all the other stuff too. Tanisha Ives was born with holes in her heart and needed open heart surgery when she was just 5 weeks old. She's had 4 pacemaker operations and quite a rough start. Now, at the age of 12, she's finally been given a donor heart, helped by a huge medical team of surgeons and others who swung into action on the day that heart became available, and is back at home recovering very well, as you can see. Now, Alison, this is great news for Tanisha. It's exactly the kind of thing that the Mirror's campaigned for, to have donor organs made available more regularly. But it's even better for the rest of us that the NHS is filled with these people who still absolutely do their best for everyone, and they would still be trying to do this no matter how overwhelmed they become at their job, if only the government would let them.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a brilliant story, and you just sort of think, for this girl, Tanisha, and her family, they're going to have a Christmas that, perhaps could have been very, very different, and it just shows the kind of the both the medical advances that have been made, which means that this is all possible, and that the hard work and the training and the care and the attention, not just of the surgeons to the operation, but of all the nurses and the auxiliary staff and everybody. And of course, in this story as well, it's really, really important to mention that this operation will only take place because a family somewhere have donated the heart of a loved one to Tanisha, and they're obviously going to be having a very, very painful, difficult Christmas. But you just hope that those people can look at Tanisha and gain some comfort from knowing that they have kept another child alive, and that is a great, great thing to have done.
Exactly. Well done to everybody involved. Absolutely brilliant. Better for Britain, one of our regular viewers. Morning, Better. One day I'll find out your name. Says Tanisha is an inspiration. Anti-vaxxers are putting her life at risk. Very sad point, Alison, but entirely accurate as well, isn't it?
It is, and I think it's really unfortunate at the moment that the whole vaccine thing has become such a divisive political issue. I mean, in London on Saturday, there was an anti-vaccine, anti-mask rally. And then apparently there were reports of some of these people getting on the tube, screaming and shouting at people who were wearing masks on the tube, obviously abiding by the law. And it just seems to have created this massive anger. And unfortunately, now we've got a big swathe of people in the country, and I'm not entirely certain why, and I'd love to find out, who are absolutely adamantly refusing to listen to any science on this topic, and putting themselves at risk. And you can say, well, okay, whatever, do what you like. However, by putting themselves at risk, they're also putting the rest of us at risk, because whilst the virus remains out there, the opportunity of mutating, coming back, and of course they're putting the NHS at risk. I mean, you talk to anybody who's working in hospitals at the moment, they will say the vast majority of people on the serious ward, COVID ward, have not been vaxxed. And I just wish we'd get to the point that rather than rowing about it, we could just try and persuade these people to do it. And if you don't want to do it for yourself, just do it for everybody else.
Yes, one of the upsides of Boris Johnson being so rubbish, perhaps, is that there are more people coming forward for their booster jab because they look at him and go, yeah, I need to be vaccinated because he's not reliable. Now, Mike says, morning, Mike, can Pippa Crerar get the scoop of the year by finding evidence of Johnson and Downing Street staff not having a party? It does seem, doesn't it, Alison, that this will kind of explain so many of the Downing Street decisions over the past 2 years. If their idea of a work meeting is indeed to rack up the empties and sit there with, you know, a nice bottle of Barolo.
Yeah, and I also think it talks to this point that there was a very interesting thing written, I don't know, over a year ago, where when they talked about going into the first lockdown, right back at the beginning of last March, apparently Boris Johnson was just saying, he's saying the British public just won't do it. They won't do it. They won't agree to stay in. And of course, we know that actually once he went and did the and him, Chris Whitty and Patrick Vallance, and they said, right, this is it, we're all going into lockdown. Actually, the British public did do it. And 99% of the British public just obeyed by every single rule and continued to do so throughout. And I just think it's very interesting. I think there's something about Boris Johnson and his, Etonian upbringing and the way his father operates and the kind of circles that those people mix in. It's not just now that they don't think the rules apply to them. I think they've grown up never thinking the rules apply to them. And so they just assume that no one else in the country would abide by the rules. They don't know people that abide by rules. They don't do that, cheat on their wives, they do this, they do that. They do what they like all the time. And I just don't think they've ever quite wrapped their head around the law-abiding nature of the vast majority of people.
I don't think we've ever met any real people. I don't think Boris Johnson's ever stood in a queue. I don't think he's ever waited in an NHS clinic. And I don't think when he was a journalist, he ever interviewed an actual human being about an actual human story. I think he just wrote crap all the time about politics, like a lot of people. Anyway, Mike says, what authority would Johnson have among his own MPs, let alone the public, when he repeatedly breaks rules and restrictions he sets and repeatedly lies about it? The answer to that, Mike, is none whatsoever, which is why we are where we are. We're going to have to wrap after that, I'm afraid, everybody, because Alison's got a proper job to do. Thank you for joining us, Alison, and everybody else. Come back on Wednesday for our last gasp of the news agenda this year, when we will be having a COVID-safe Christmas Zoom quiz with Mark Steele. So do come back for that. Thank you for joining us, everybody, and we'll see you for the last one on Wednesday. Bye-bye.
Bye.